We are in the Ten Commandments.
Yep.
We're going to be wrapping it up tonight.
Yep.
Last week, we talked about the context surrounding the Ten Commandments. So if you have not done so already, please go back and watch the first video so you can get really important context around where we're at in the biblical narrative,
Right.
And why the Ten Commandments were given to the Israelites. So all that good information, go back and watch that video. Then come back here,
Yeah.
and we're going to pick up in the second commandment. We also dug into the first commandment, the sandwich, the chiasm of it all. So that really, the first commandment summarized is to worship God and God alone.
Right. Yep. Perfect.
And now we are moving into the second commandment, which is you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain.
Right.
So what do you think of when you hear that?
So I get the sense that myself included back in the day, and probably a lot of you tend to probably think that means don't use God as a curse word. Don't use his name in a curse word, right?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much where we take that.
Where most of
yeah,
us who grew up in a church probably think of that. But we know that there's a whole lot more to it than just don't use God's name as a curse word.
So,
Which is really, you don't want to do that anyways, because that takes away the reverence and awe and fear of the Lord.
Right.
But we are going to dig into this.
yeah, so let's unpack
more.
this.
Yeah.
Read 7 for me
In its entirety.
in its entirety.
Exodus 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain.
Oh, perfect. So there's a word there, take. That's the hinge word on this verse. That's the thing that keeps this verse guessing, so to speak, for people. In the Hebrew, the word take is nasa.
Nasa.
Yep, right.
Okay.
And to take in nasa, in this instance, carries kind of a speech connotation to it.
Okay.
So you're not speaking the Lord's name in vain. So what we were just talking about a minute ago, right? With that, though, carries kind of a question mark of we're not really sure what that means. Like in what situation were you not supposed to take the Lord's name in vain? Was
Could
it
it be
an
an
oath?
oath?
Right. Was it a vow? Was it a magical spell? There's all
Curse.
these a curse, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that goes. It was almost like an unwritten rule of what Israel knew it and we don't.
Yeah.
That's kind of where that goes. And I agree.
That's fair.
Okay, I agree. I think that's part of it. I think that's part of what this is talking about. But we're going to unpack this to kind of give you a full range of what this really looks like to take the Lord's name in vain, to not take the Lord's name in vain. Okay.
So bear with us. We're going to make a full circle here,
yep.
but this stuff is really important, and
Right.
you're going to see the connections from different verses to better understand this. So let's get this ball rolling.
So there's another translation or another English word for nasa that means to carry.
Okay, so different nuances of
Right.
the word nasa
Right.
used biblically.
Right. The problem with carry is, in this instance, is how do you carry a name? How do you carry somebody's name? Doesn't quite make sense.
Doesn't make sense in our culture.
Right. The answer to that is in Exodus 28:29, and we're going to look at Aaron the high priest, if you'll read that for us.
Yeah, it says, Aaron shall carry the names of the sons of Israel in the breastpiece of judgment over his heart when he enters the holy place, for a memorial before the Lord continually.
The word for carries there is
Nasa.
nasa. So he's carrying the names of Israel on these gemstones that are sealed.
Yeah, it's part of the priestly garment.
Right.
You can read about that in other parts of
Right.
the Bible, but it's important for him to enter the holy place wearing
Right.
this garment and
Right.
this gemstones.
Right. So in verse, I think it's 19, it talks about that it's sealed. So in the gemstones are sealed with the names. In the ancient world, a seal is a sign of ownership.
Okay.
So when he puts this on, the high priest is now representing the 12 tribes of Israel in front of the Lord. So he's now being the representation of Israel in front of God.
Okay.
So he's carrying their name in front of God. Okay, you got that?
I got
So
that.
far, so good?
So far, so good.
The next thing is he also has a turban that he wears. Okay?
Which is still a common practice in Israel today.
Oh, nice.
By the way.
Yeah, right.
When I was working on my master's in biblical studies, got to take a class going through Israel and got to see the video of people walking around wearing the turban.
Which is pretty cool.
It's really cool, yeah.
So in that, on the turban, it says "Holy to the Lord" on it. Obviously in Hebrew, not English.
That's fair.
In front of Lord, so Yahweh in Hebrew is an L. It says "Lach Yahweh."
Yahweh. Okay.
In Hebrew, that El is another marker of ownership. So now it says Lach Yahweh, which is now designating that that priest is now owned, right? He is exclusively now God's.
Okay.
So if you had a journal and you want everyone in the ancient Near East to know it's your journal, you would put El in front of your name. So it would be Lach Morgan.
Yeah, don't touch my journal.
Yeah, don't touch. That's right. It'd be a marker of.
It's mine.
So now what you have, okay, check this out. So now what you have is the high priest representing, carrying the name of Israel, representing Israel to the Lord, okay?
Okay.
But at the same time, he's also now representing the Lord to Israel.
Okay. So he's a mediator.
Right, between the two. So he's now ownership on both sides.
Okay.
That's keep
that in mind
So,
as we go on to the next part of the circle.
right. So now we're going to flash back to Exodus 19, 4 through 6. And this is a part that leads right up into the terms of the covenant in Exodus 20.
Yeah, so this is right before the Ten Commandments.
Right.
Exodus 19, 4 through 6.
Yep.
You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay.
Got it?
Got it.
Israel's three things now. God is now telling Israel your three things. Treasured possession,
Okay.
holy nation,
Okay.
kingdom of priests.
Okay.
God is giving them an identity, right?
Yes.
This is the thing that you are, and this is the thing that you are to do, right? You are now to represent me well to the nations. So if you think about the high priest, now they're mediating. The high priest mediated between God and Israel, right? Now Israel is going to mediate between God and the other nations. See that little connection there between the high priest and Israel? And they're also now a holy nation. So if you think about the high priest, he's wholly set apart for his vocation, right?
Okay.
Israel's now called a holy nation, so now their service is set apart for God. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
You
that
start
makes
to
sense.
see the connection between the high priest and Israel.
Okay.
Okay, you got that?
I got that.
So far, so good?
So far, so good.
So here's where this takes us. How does this all kind of connect? The high priest, as the mediator between God and Israel, is now this visual representation between now Israel and God and the other nations.
Okay.
So what the high priest does is he is now a model. He's a visual representation of what Israel is now to the other nations. When they see the high priest, they're going to be reminded of what their calling is.
Okay.
As the high priest mediates between them and God, we now are reminded that we mediate between God and the other nations.
Okay.
It's their vocation.
Okay.
So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay. What does that all mean,
Yeah,
though?
tie all this up for us.
So, as a representation now of God, this commandment in 27 says, do not take the Lord's name in vain. What that means is, do not misrepresent me to the other nations. Do not bear my name wrong, essentially.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this commandment, even though it has a speech act in it, the true commandment, as you tie it in with everything, is don't misrepresent me to the other nations.
Bear God's name well.
Yep, right. So God has claimed Israel as their own, right? This is what Sinai is all about. And now he's telling them to live out their vocation. Bear my name well to the other nations. That's the whole crux of that, the second commandment.
Okay.
Bear my name well.
So we have worship God and God alone in the first commandment. The second commandment is to represent or to bear God's name well to the other nations.
And this formula, this worship God and God alone and bear my name well, is sprinkled throughout the Old Testament. We see it in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. I am yours and you are mine. It's all throughout, and it starts right here. It's fascinating. These two commandments, the covenant formula, this is the recipe for how they fulfill this vocation and ultimately will receive covenant blessings from God. You do these things and you do these things well, the reward is covenant blessings, right? That's the whole thing here. So that's but here's the deal.
Okay.
And if you track,
Here's the deal, pickle.
Here's the deal, pickle. If you track Israel throughout the Old Testament, they get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, they do. They don't do this well.
And the trouble is that they fail to do the first two commandments. One of the two or both every time. That's the thing. That's where they fail every time. These two things are the things that if you walk through this all the way until the New Testament, this is the thing that they fail out. And this is the thing that leads them into exile. That's fascinating, guys. It's these two things repeated over and over and over again is the thing that eventually...
Wonder if that's important for us.
Yeah, right. And we'll talk about that here at the end of this, about how that's important to us. So now you get these two commandments, right? And they're the framework commandments for everything that comes after
For the
rest
next
of the
8
right?
commandments, yeah.
The next 8 now tell us what covenant faithfulness should look like in our everyday lives.
Yeah, so it's kind of a framework of living
Right.
so that you do worship God and God alone and represent Him well.
Right, and then these things will come out of that, and this is how you will...
And they are...
So you have Sabbath, work, rest, right? We both work and rest in your everyday life. You have family, honor your mother and father.
Yeah, and that's not just for children. That's for the adults as well.
That is it's a big thing in the ancient world. He doesn't change the audience when he talks about that, so we keep that in mind. Don't murder, right? That's a conflict resolution. Stealing, right? That's a property deal, which is big.
Committing adultery, you forgot that one.
Committing adultery, that's marriage. Reputation was big in the ancient world, so false testimony has to do with reputation. And then don't covet, right? And that one, it's hard to measure, but it's all about character development, which is huge, right? Character development is huge. We're all wanting to grow in one way, shape, or form. So you get these now 10 commandments, right? It's about inward motivation.
Yeah, so it's a heart matter.
And then what flows from that, your behavior.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Okay, so then next week we are going to go into the New Testament and look at Jesus talking about the commands of love God, love your neighbor, and how it ties into the New Testament and really ties into us today in 2022 as believers who believe God's word, old and new, love it, study it, and want to live by it. I find it really fascinating and really important to really find the crux is love God and God alone and represent Him well.
Which is what we should do today. And we'll talk about that next week.